Well, a new startup out of Europe is delving into e-scooters and micromobility. Flash raising 55 million euros, that's about 62.8 million US dollars, and just a Series A financing, a pretty big round. Joining us now is Carlos Bhola, co-founder of Flash. Carlos, great to have you here.
Thank you.
What is micromobility?
So I think micromobility for us is, if you look at sort of in general rides is a human wanting to go from point A to point B. When that point A to point B actually compresses down, especially either in the last mile of a longer ride or purely in a short ride, that's how we define micromobility. And depending on who you talk to, it could range from 0.5 kilometers to 3 kilometers. In some cases, we're seeing it be 9 kilometers long where people aren't served properly.
So what is the difference between Flash and just another scooter company?
Good question. So a lot of people define companies by the type of vehicle that they are offering. A scooter company, for example. But you don't hear Uber going out and saying, well, we're a cars company or we're an SUV company. The truth is, we are in the business of providing humans, consumers, with rides. And those rides will require different types of vehicles, and they will necessarily need to integrate into other modalities, public and private transportation systems, in order to satisfy a consumer's end-to-end need. So for us, when we speak of micromobility, what we start with is, if I made the end of that ride or the entirety of that ride, if it's a short ride, and we use lightweight vehicles, lightweight electric vehicles to get to that point. We start with scooters because today that is the vehicle that's available entirely. But we very quickly, that's part of the reason why we launched, if I may, last of the European players. We launched last because we've been spending an awful lot of time in the back end of our business, ensuring that there's vehicles that can deliver what we consider to be the 4 key drivers of rides for us. Safe, convenient, that means available when you want it, affordable, and comfortable. And the vehicles today don't necessarily fit those criteria.
What is lighter, more comfortable, and cheaper than a scooter? Is it a pair of rollerblades?
Walking. It's potentially much more depending on
walking.
No, we're not going to charge you for walking. That's not the business we're in. But we also have to recognize that scooters aren't the be it all and end it all in all markets at all times of the year. Things you've got to think really hard about is, what's the profile of the terrain on which somebody is traveling. The average scooter that has a certain wheel width, for example, isn't necessarily the most safe ride for certain types of, for certain topographies. Going uphill, but also, for example, if you go to Lisbon, Portugal, where the cobblestones are significantly smaller than in Berlin, Germany, which is much larger cobblestones, it requires a different profile of vehicle, both from the wheel, the powertrain, etc.
So you really want to go niche with these devices, and who are you working with to build them?
I wouldn't say niche. I would say we're going to cover a wider spectrum of rides, but with a wider spectrum of vehicles. Who are we working with to develop those? That's a very good question. Where we started out is, we started out from making sure that we have vehicles out. So we internally ourselves started for the last 6 months working on that suite of vehicles. Like everybody else, we started with the commodity types of vehicles that were on the market, and we very quickly changed over to our own vehicles. So you will see this year coming up, we are going to put 5 different types of vehicles on the roads of Europe.
Are they all
across
scooters?
The markets. They are scooters, scooter-likes, and they are variants of that. I'm not at liberty to disclose them prematurely.
Well, so what's your competitive advantage? What's your secret sauce that makes you different than another scooter company?
For me, I think of 3 key things. I mentioned earlier multi-vehicles. We're recognizing that even within the scooter category, there are multiple scooters. Everything is not a scooter. And in fact, we launched under the Catch brand. This is not a scooter.
So, right. And are you guys designing these vehicles yourself?
We are.
You patent them. So you know, Lime or Bird couldn't go out and buy the exact same vehicle and launch?
At this point, not. That's not to say that we aren't willing to collaborate with other scooter companies. That's a second key element of ours. So the second key competitive advantage of us is our willingness to be what I call multimodal. That means working with other forms of public and private transportation systems. That's a very critical item for us. The third, and probably the most critical item, it's something that we learned from our sister company in Latin America, Grin, is that we're not only serving riders, we're also serving non-riders in communities, and we're also serving municipal authorities whose mission it is to ensure greater mobility for consumers in those markets. So we are simultaneously focusing our operations on consumers, what we call consumers, communities, and municipalities.
Okay, you threw out a lot of different locations because
Sure.
you were focused outside of the US at this point.
No, we're focused outside of the US. Flash, the company that announced the financing that you just mentioned, our first closing was 55 million euros, is focused on Europe. We have a sister company, and there was an announcement out today about Grin, our sister company, being merged with Yellow in Latin America to create the Latin American leader. We learn a lot from what Grin has been doing in Latin America. Grin, for example, has reached a million rides faster than anybody else has.
So you are focusing on outside the US right now?
We are focused on both Latin America and in Europe, but Flash specifically is focused on Europe.
Right. Okay. So I wanted to bring that up because we've seen a lot of debates around whether or not a multinational company like an Uber can successfully compete in regions where they might not know the culture locally, where they have had difficulty. If you look at what happened with Grab last year, with Yandex in Russia, Didi exiting out of China, Uber did, right, working with Didi. Do you feel that mobility is a one solution fits all, or do you think that we will see more localized companies dominate in their region and Uber and Lyft being more confined to maybe Western countries and English-speaking countries?
I think that's a great question. I think that especially last mile mobility will be hyper-local. So being hyper-local doesn't mean you cannot stitch together a global brand, but the global brand will be union of a number of hyper-local operational entities. So for example, the way we are organizing our company in Flash, which is headquartered in Berlin, our teams in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, in Switzerland, in France, they're operating entirely very, very much more autonomously than you can imagine. We aggregate best-in-class practices where it makes sense. For example, vehicle design, development, deployment. For example, some of the best practices in load balancing, making vehicles be available where users need to, in maintenance and operations, and of course in branding. But the actual operations is hyper-local.
Tell me if this analogy makes sense. Coca-Cola bottling company. Coca-Cola is a multinational brand, based obviously in one country, but they work with very local companies to bottle and to distribute. Is that kind of what we should be thinking about when it comes to this hyper-local idea for mobility?
Almost like that, except we need to understand that the formats of the bottles and the size of the bottles in different markets will vary.
Exactly.
Coca-Cola, I think, sells as pretty standard product.
I mean, if you go to the Atlanta headquarters, you can get to all different kinds of flavors from all over the world, so they are a little bit different.
That's right, but in Europe, whereas in one market you might sell a 4-ounce can, and in New York City, well, not after Bloomberg, but let's say there was an opportunity to do a 24-ounce.
The soda companies won, don't worry.
But my point is yes, there's a hyper-local element of this. But also remember, it's not only hyper-local about the product we are offering, it's to whom we're offering that product, and that's really important as we look at this.
So Carlos, what's the secret to working well with local governments and working well to make sure that one of your constituencies, people who are not riding these vehicles, are well served by the vehicles in the cities that you operate in?
The way we look at it is we invert the paradigm around working with local authorities. The average local e-scooter company goes and thinks of a local authority as a place they get a license to operate or permission to operate. We kind of think about it slightly differently. We sit back and we say, hey, listen, here's a local municipality, here's the mobility needs. How can we work with you, inclusive of integrating with existing public and private systems that are in that market? How can we come up with a solution, and then how do we fit into that? So I think it's more of a proactive solution to serve our communities rather than the opposite way. Fly in with a bottle of Coke and have them drink Coca-Cola.
Carlos Bhola, co-founder of Flash. It's not another scooter company. Did I get that?
So much.
That
yeah, this is not a scooter with the brand.
This is not a scooter brand.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us on Cheddar Rides today. Great to have you.
Thank you very much.